Welcome. You are listening to Haunted Histories on Paranormal UK Radio. Hello and welcome to the last Haunted Histories of 2020. Only of 2020, mind you. We've got loads more coming up in 2021. Yes, it's Penny Griffiths-Morgan, Haunted Histories, here on Paranormal UK Radio. I hope you're all well. I hope you've enjoyed the content this year. I know it's been a blooming awful year for many people, and some change their direction, and it's given them a chance to reassess, which you've got to look on the positive, haven't you? Well, for the last show of the year, I decided to go all out. I wanted to go all out. And not only have we're going to be talking about something connected with real royalty, I've also got a guest who is possibly paranormal royalty as well. He's someone who, if I'm honest, when I saw he was a doctor, I thought it was a joke, a bit like, Gillian McKeith and that kind of thing. I didn't realise he really genuinely was one of those clever guys clever people who can do a PhD. You might recognise him from, well, he's been everywhere. He had an article recently in Haunted magazine. He's done a lot of the online stuff. He used to be on Most Haunted. He's been on other things on television as well. And he holds a day job down as well. It is the wonderful Dr. Ciaran O'Keefe.
Hello. Hi, Penny. How are you?
I'm all right. Thank you, Kieran. How are you?
I'm all right. That was by far the best introduction that I've ever had. To call me paranormal royalty,
well, you are.
That is a first. And that is just lovely. That's made my day. That really has.
Oh, good. No, you are, though. You are one of the sort of the go-to paranormal people in the UK, really, aren't you?
It's very kind of you to say. I can think of various other names that I would go to, but I guess you could call me paranormal royalty maybe because of the number of years that I've been involved in this. And if we start to look at that, then we could call you paranormal royalty too, in terms of, the years of experience collectively that we've got looking into this sort of stuff and being fascinated by it. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I think of you as one of the sort of the top paranormal people. I mean, obviously everyone's got different kind of specialisms, haven't they? But you're one of the ones that, if anyone thinks of a paranormal psychologist or parapsychologist, however you want to word it, you're normally one of the first people.
I mean, that's fair. It's fair enough for you to say that. And I think that's one of the advantages of having been on television.
Yeah.
I was a parapsychologist before Most Haunted, and when Most Haunted stopped for me, I carried on being a parapsychologist. And of course, if I'd never done the television stuff, my name wouldn't be as known as it is now. People might have read some of my articles and some of my research. I've got a few books, that sort of thing. So there might be a little bit of interest or knowledge, but actually, being on television gives you that public profile.
Yes.
So it has helped in that respect, and I'm forever grateful.
But you're not. I mean, your sort of, I suppose, educational grounding is actually in psychology, isn't it? You chose to specialise in parapsychology.
Yeah.
Your masters, you chose to look into.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a mix. I think looking back on it, it's been there in terms of the parapsychology stuff from very early on. So when I did my undergraduate degree, it was a liberal arts degree, which basically means you can kind of pick and choose what your subject is, but you major in a particular subject.
Yeah.
And for me, I majored in psychology, but I majored in music. So it's a double major, music and psychology. But the psychology part when I did my final undergraduate thesis, was about paranormal beliefs and experiences, and it was conducted in conjunction with a parapsychologist at the Institute of Parapsychology. So that was where the academic stuff started. And then my master's in investigative, which is about psychological assistance for criminal investigations. The thesis that I did for that master's was about psychic detectives. And then, of course, off the back of that, I then ended up doing a PhD. And whilst the PhD is focused on rhetoric and kind of the linguistics of persuasion, actually it was about looking at psychics and mediums. So throughout my academic career, it's always been psychology, but I have always kind of majored or focused on the paranormal aspects because it's what I love.
Well, I think of people like yourself, obviously Dr. Cal Cooper's another one, Jane Harris, all with a background in psychology, but all fascinated by this is one of the things I love when Jane and I sit and chat quite frequently, and we'll sort of pick each other's brains about things. She picks mine on the history and I'll pick hers on the sort of the psychology side of things. And it's definitely, the auto-suggestion and everything else, which is something I'm going to come on to when we start talking about the venue that we're going to be talking about. But would it be fair to say, Kieran, that you're quite sceptical?
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely fair. But I mean, skeptical in the true sense of the word, because skeptical actually means that you're open-minded to the possibility, or open-minded generally, but that you're questioning. Within the media, of course, the word skeptic has become synonymous with cynic.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm not a cynic. A cynic means somebody that's closed-minded, that's blinkered, that doesn't hear any alternative explanations. In the same way that if you get somebody that's a dogmatic believer, they are also blinkered and they won't hear about alternative views. So you've got those two at the extreme ends of the spectrum. And I think skepticism is a lovely middle ground to be. You can still have a belief either way, but also be skeptical, which means that you are questioning what you come across. And that's always been my approach. If anything, I would say I was more believing earlier on in my life. I've become maybe more empathic, more sympathetic later on in life, but my belief stance hasn't changed. I'm now, if anything, skeptical with a more scientific mind to it. But I think it's fair to say that I'm a skeptic, and my media profile kind of portrays that. I always say I'm wheeled on as the party pooper on many of these shows to give
my job a lot of the time, Kieran. But people say, this person lived here, and I'm like, well, if they lived there in the date you're saying, no, they really didn't. And
no, they didn't.
It's either side, brilliant. And they really didn't. Yeah.
That's brilliant. The historical skeptic. So we like to play the party villain, and I don't mind that at all, because there is a media aspect to it, which is they sometimes have to bring in an alternative explanation. There actually is no requirement for them to do that now. I would say about 10 years ago, up to about 10 years ago, you would have to, Ofcom, who kind of oversees all of these things, say that you have to have the alternative viewpoint. You don't actually need that alternative viewpoint now, but I think a lot of program makers still like to have it. So I don't mind offering that. But I do get, it is a little grating when people think of me as being a cynic.
Yeah.
Because that anybody that knows me, and we've talked before, they'll know that I'm definitely not a cynic. I'm very much open-minded to the possibility.
Well, it's funny you said those exact words, because I mean, anyone listening, we haven't got the cameras on, so Kieran can't actually see my notes, but I had actually written skeptic versus cynic on my notes.
Oh, perfect.
So there is, I mean, I'm probably become more skeptic the more I've experienced, if that makes sense, because I've started to learn different ways of questioning things, and learn and listening to other people, and sort of learning about how photography can be influenced. When people say, it's a spirit, and it's like, no, it's a dirty window behind you that the flash has put, things like that. And again, like party pooper, but I'm certainly not a cynic. I think I did an interview once, and they said, what would you describe yourself as? And I said, a scaliever. a skeptical believer.
Nice.
I believe, but I am always going to question. The one thing I won't ever question, and I don't know about you, is if someone says, I felt this is how it made me feel, because you can't question how someone feels.
No, and I think you're absolutely right, and that's at the heart of skepticism. To be honest, is and at the heart of parapsychology now, although 20, 30 years ago it may not have been, but certainly now it's very much acknowledging if somebody has an experience, your role is not to explain that experience away.
Yeah.
That if anything, we should almost take what I would call a transpersonal psychology approach to it, almost a humanistic psychology approach, which is basically saying, I am interested in your story and your account of your experience, and what actually I'm more interested in is the significance of that experience to you. How has it affected you? How has it transformed you or transformed your beliefs? What sort of positive impact has it had on you? That's the sort of thing I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But actually, if somebody tells you their own personal subjective experience, of which there is no real way of measuring, then actually, yes, you can't suddenly barrel in, all guns blazing and say, no, it's rubbish, that was infrasound or that was suggestion. That's not the way to approach things. Although saying that, and I might be jumping ahead here, there was a point in the past where people would present me with orb photos on a regular basis when I first became part of Most Haunted, and I did often have that kind of cynical, arrogant response to it when people showed me orb photos. And I would say, well, there's a perfectly natural explanation for it. And I would go into this long diatribe about orbs and about the CCD chip inside a digital camera and how that had created the orb, and it was kind of a perfectly natural phenomena. But as I was telling the story and telling my account and my explanation of what was going on, I could almost see the positivity drain from the person's face as I was saying it, and it was a realization of, what, I can talk about this natural explanation, but actually this person, in a way, is after a little bit of affirmation. They're after me saying, oh, that's an interesting photograph, that's an orb. There are alternative explanations, but if you place some significance on that, then I'll leave that with you.
Yep.
And so that was a real learning experience very early on in my career, that actually a lot of the time when people are approaching me for explanations, they're not after me to explain it away. They may be after some sort of input to kind of help them, make it part of their own life story, but actually they don't want it explained away necessarily. And I think that's something that cynics do very well. Cynics will barrel in there and they will explain it away without any empathy, or kind of sympathy for the person that's telling them the account.
Yeah, I've experienced. I did actually experience a cynic not so long ago in a charity shop where I'd found this book on ghosts that it was like 99p or something like that, and I thought, oh, my eldest son will quite enjoy that. There might be stuff in there I can write about or dig into, or the little tidbits. And one of the staff was asking me about the paranormal, and she lives in Canewdon, which anyone who knows Essex will know that's quite a well-known area of Essex. It's meant to be quite paranormal. They actually have to shut the gates sometimes on Halloween because so many people turn up there. And her colleague was saying something to me, the one who was obviously believed in it, or was it genuinely interested? She said something about, what's this I've ever heard of? So she was asking me to explain pareidolia, which I was explaining in a non-scientific way, but basically your brain is trying to make order out of chaos, and it will try and make something it recognises. That's my understanding of it.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could give me a very technical explanation.
No, that's a perfect explanation. Perfect description.
Oh, okay, that's fine then. But then she said I've read that sometimes they can manifest in different ways. And I said, yeah, I've experienced a few times a smell that just doesn't make sense. Now, I know there's a psychological word for it, which I can't remember off the top of my head, because I wrote about it in my last book. But it was completely illogical, this smell. And I was telling, it was at a castle in Somerset. And I remember at the time, I then told the receptionist what I'd smelled. And she said, you know what, you're not the first one to smell that. And it's non-smoking. You would not smell old-fashioned tobacco being smoked in that room. And apparently it's quite a common one to be smelled there. Not everyone does it, but... And I was telling this, and the other assistant goes, well, that's a load of rubbish, isn't it? It doesn't exist. I live in an old house. There's different smells in every room. It doesn't mean it's haunted. And I just thought, A, we weren't talking to you.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key thing.
I didn't actually ask your opinion. And I sort of turned around and was quite rude to her about it and saying, you know, putting someone's beliefs down like that. I can't remember what I said, but I shot her down. Because to me... You know, it's like certain things. Like I don't believe in religion, but I won't turn around to someone who is religious and say, "What do you waste your time with that for? It's a load of hooey." You know what?
Yeah.
Because unless they try and preach at me, if they preach at me, then I might. But if, you know, I won't take the mickey out of them, and I want the same respect back. Whereas cynics, they just it's a load of rubbish. Don't believe in that.
And you're right. It's well, what is the benefit? What are you trying to achieve with that? You know, and that's why I come at it very much from a skeptical perspective. And of course, I'm an educator. I've been, you know, involved in academia for decades now, and the main part of what I do is about educating people. And if you do barrel into these sort of conversations, you're absolutely right, where you may not even be part of that conversation at all. So what on earth are you doing kind of interrupting anyway? But if you go in with that cynical, kind of aggressive, know-it-all tone anyway, why are you doing that? You're not going to achieve anything. If actually what you want to do is educate people and make them aware of these alternative explanations so that then they can make up their own mind, then that's what you need to do. But there's a way of doing it. I mean, you yourself do it with the writing that you do. And of course, these podcasts as well, you're able to educate people and kind of making them aware of all of these different perspectives. And that is a healthy way to be in this particular field, to be cynical, but also on the flip side, to be dogmatic. And to be blinkered from that perspective as well. It's just not helpful for anybody. And I see, if anything, I've seen a development within the field, which is more along what you're saying. What did you call it? Skelever? Which is a
Skelever, yeah.
Fantastic.
Your believer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
You can take that. You can use that, Kieran.
Okay, can I have that? Yeah, I'll copyright it to you.
You can borrow it. I will credit, but you can borrow it. Yeah.
I'll credit you. Don't worry. But I see it more and more. If anything, the field has developed, so I'm seeing more knowledge, and I think because I'm seeing more knowledge of people because of the internet, because of podcasts, because of magazines, books, TV shows, because you're seeing people kind of thirsty for the knowledge about this area, you're seeing that more of a skeptical approach, even if they may lean towards a believer side or kind of the science or cynical side, there's still that questioning. And I think that's a really healthy way that the field is at the moment.
I think being a questioning, I mean, I'm a nightmare for questions. I mean, you know, I guarantee once we finish talking, I will think of some questions I'll have to email you that we didn't cover. You know, I'm one of those people, I've constantly got questions, but that's why I tend to say I investigate things as opposed to just report them, because I am constantly questioning. And what isn't always realised is if I write down an experience I've had, I will have questioned that experience about 10 times before I've written it down. You know, I would have said, could it be this? Could it be this? Could it be this? What about this? What about... And I do think that's a healthy way to be in this field. It's one of the few, I think it's one of the things that's going to give us plausibility. If you can show the checks and measures that you've gone through before you've said, well, this could be, I'm pretty sure this is paranormal because I cannot explain it, therefore it's not normal. May not be a ghost, maybe something we've not really, you know, maybe it's a form of, I don't know, group telekinesis or something ridiculous. You know, nobody really knows.
And, absolutely. And I speak to my students, you know, parapsychology students all the time, and I'm constantly trying to trip them up when I present them with cases, because I've done it in the past. When I started very, very, very early on in my career, I would be looking at all the natural explanations. And I would forget and not mention the paranormal explanation initially if it was presented as a ghost case. But then, of course, absolutely, whilst the number of natural explanations is immense for, say, a simple apparition, the number of supernatural explanations for that apparition are also immense. Yeah. And you within this field, I think it especially because the cases that you're presented with, or the evidence that you're presented with, has gone. It's happened already. It was spontaneous and it happened. You're not there at that particular point to be able to assess it in a very different way. You're looking at it retrospectively. Yeah. So therefore, you've got to present all of the explanations equally, and say, well, there are going to be possible supernatural explanations and possible natural explanations for everything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, changing the subject slightly, I mean, you mentioned about you studying music. I think I didn't know this until I was looking it up, that you're a classically trained pianist.
Yes, I was playing the piano from the age of 4.
And you were born in Norwich.
Yes.
I grew up in Norwich, Kieran.
You're kidding. What, in the city of Norwich?
I was about 6 miles out.
I guess we can't. Can we say live where it is?
You probably wouldn't have ever heard of it. It's a place called Ketteringham, which is this tiny little village. Probably the nearest big town to where I was about 3 miles towards Norwich from Wymondham, if you know where Wymondham.
Okay, I know where Wymondham is, and I lived the first 8 years of my life in Heatherset.
I was the other side of the A11 to you then.
There you go.
Because Kettringham's the other side. You probably have heard of Ketteringham then.
I have indeed, which is why you can't see, but I've got a huge smile on my face when you mentioned it.
Wow, my parents still live there.
A small world.
Isn't it just? Wow. There you go. When I saw Norwich, I mean, obviously people always put Norwich, even if it's Greater Norfolk, but they wrong because nobody's ever heard of half of it. But there you go. That's freaky. Never met anyone I've spoken to who knew Heatherset, let alone Ketteringham.
That's hilarious. And I was born in Norwich. I was genuinely born in Norwich, in a flat in Norwich. But before the age of 1, I think at about 6 months, my parents moved out of that flat and moved to Heatherset.
Well, I was born in Essex, but my parents made me leave Essex and move to Norfolk when I was 3. And they used to say from the age of 4, I was trying to go back to Essex.
That's brilliant.
I'm here now. I made it back sort of 20 odd years ago, but
wow.
But they're still there. And yes, for a historian, when I discovered the history of Ketteringham with the bomber links to World War II bomber links and everything else, I'm like a pig in the proverbial.
It's also a place that bizarrely, of course, those first 8 years of my life didn't feature in my parapsychology past. But of course, going back to the Norwich area, well, going back to Norfolk anyway as a county. I mean, there's some amazing locations in Norfolk. Indeed. Generally. So it's lovely to go back to that whole area. Well, Heatherset doesn't really have its haunted properties, but Norwich and Norfolk does. And when you go back to that area, it's just seeing it from a completely fresh set of eyes, which is just lovely.
Yes, amazing. I do enjoy going back now when I go and see the parents and I go exploring and finding old airfields now and all that kind of thing. And
yes, and where was one of the last UK lives that we did for Most Haunted? RAF Fakenham.
See, I've never been
in Norfolk.
I know Fakenham really well, but
RAF Fakenham, which was an interesting choice given the title. Enough said. Let's move on.
Let's pass through that one because we don't want to be sued. Yeah. No. Yeah. But yes, Norfolk. Oh, wow. Well, Heatherset, that is weird. It was destined. It was destiny that we were going to do this.
Destined to be.
Destined. Right. One other question I wanted to ask you before we start talking about the place we're going to be talking about tonight is one that it's a stunning building, and I've been doing there's so much information about it online, but a lot of it is general information, and I wanted to find some little nitty-gritty bits, but it's Hampton Court Palace in southwest London, where we're going to be talking about tonight. But one of the things, I was reading an article that you'd been interviewed for. It was a good few years ago, I found it. And you were saying about some investigators, it's dangerous, the whole sort of people going in and saying there's an evil entity in your house. It can cause a lot of psychological problems. And the way it was written, it was almost like, and please excuse the way I'm going to ask this, it was almost like you felt someone had to be a parapsychologist to do that job.
You mean to go into a private residence?
Yeah.
No, well, not really. Not necessarily. It might have been kind of the way that came across. I think it's more so, as a parapsychologist, somebody with a psychology background, it's more so kind of the ethical side in terms of the ethics consideration. And I think that's more, if I was writing that now, it would take a different tone, which is very much around the ethics side, like I did for, Haunted Magazine. It's basically saying, as psychologists, from day one, from very, very early on in our training, as even as undergraduate students, ethics is kind of thrown at you constantly thinking about ethics. And even though the overarching principle is do no harm, there is so much more to ethics. And it's more about saying, as parapsychologists with a psychology background, we know about ethics 100%. Yeah. So that's where it comes from. But I think part of my crusade this year in 2020 has been about kind of raising more awareness about para-ethics generally, because you don't have to be a parapsychologist, but you have to know about ethics, and you have to be genuinely thinking about leaving that person in the same or a better state than when they were before you started the investigation. And I think that's the key point.
Yeah. So not you trying to use shock tactics to get an artist, something you can look good on Facebook with.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I've got into huge debates off camera, but off social media. So I don't like to have a lot of debates on social media, because I think that can get kind of misinterpreted, and there's a lot of misinterpretation of emotion associated with words. But once I take those discussions out of social media and start discussing, one-to-one with various people that have points, it's exactly that. It's making them realize, well, look, you may think that you're approaching this very ethically, and that's great, but actually, do you realize, as part of your investigation that you have filmed and that you've put on Facebook with the approval of the family who own the property that you've investigated, as part of that, you walked into the child's bedroom and filmed the child's bedroom? And they go, well, yeah, no, but that's absolutely fine because we've got permission to do that. No, that's not the point. You've got permission of the parents, but actually what you're not talking about is fully informed consent. Yeah. Just saying, oh, we'd like to film this as part of that. Well, you've presented it in a context on a social media platform that is about the shock value. It is about the evidence. It is about all of this. And what you're not considering is the parents, but also that child, as they grow up, looking back at that footage that is now publicly available on Facebook or wherever, and they have, and you could potentially be causing, further anxiety or fear, or whatever the psychological impact could be, just by posting that online. Yeah. So even that small thing, making a decision to post online, is a huge kind of ethical consideration. Yeah. And I've said it before, it's not easy. It's absolutely not easy to think about ethics at every single stage of the investigation. It's not easy, but, if we can start the conversation and start the debate about ethics and raise people's awareness, I think that can only be a good thing.
I agree. Right. Hampton Court Palace.
Oh, yes.
I mean... I genuinely didn't realise until I started reading. I knew it was big. I knew it was a big place. I didn't realise until I started investigating that it covers something like 11 acres worth of land. It has over 240 chimneys, over 1,300 rooms, 17 courtyards. I mean, it's huge. It's an huge place. I also noticed, actually, where I live in Chelmsford in Essex, and we used to have one of, because basically it's a quick thing. It was actually a manor house before. I think it was occupied by basically the Knights Hospitalier. I can never pronounce that. The Order of St. John of Jerusalem. They occupied it. And Cardinal Thomas Woolsey took it over.
That's right.
In 1514, decided that the manor house, even though it was a lovely manor house with a lovely moat, wasn't good enough. And he spent in the region of 8.2 million in 1 year.
Wow, I didn't realise
renovating it. That's today's money. I think that would have been about 1,600 quid, but in today's money, about 8.2 million. And although wait until you get to how much Henry spent to upgrade it. But Thomas Woolsey, fascinating character. We're not going to talk about him because we've only got about half an hour, and I could talk about Thomas Woolsey for hours. But he was a fascinating character, and if you haven't heard of him, go and look him up. He was probably the second most powerful man in England, next to Henry VIII. He was Henry's right-hand man. Well, he took Hampton Court and he redeveloped it. It was beautiful. All the brickwork you see now with the sort of the diamond shapes in different bricks and all that was partly him. Henry started getting a bit jealous because this palace was nicer than what he had. And in a nutshell, Thomas Woolsey kind of took a dive in his popularity with Henry, shall we say. He wasn't beheaded. He was on a few people. He wasn't actually beheaded. But he gave up the property to Henry in 1529 as sort of a sorry, I've messed up. Whether he had or not is irrelevant. Sorry, I've messed up. And I think it was all to do with him getting the papal agreement or whatever for Henry to divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn. It was all to do with that. Anyway, so Henry takes it over in 1529. And would you like to hazard a guess, Kieran, at how many millions Henry spent on it, upgrading it to a palace more befitting for a king and his queen?
I've got no idea, but given that you said 8 million for Cardinal Wolsey, I would say, 10 million maybe?
Oh, and the rest. Historians estimate, he spent over 470 million pounds working on it.
Wow.
And he had about 60 palaces. It's no wonder he was broke. And he was broke. People don't realise that. But he actually also built one in Chelmsford called Bewley Palace, which is actually a school, New Hall boarding school, well, private school. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky enough to visit there because I was doing a talk on Henry VIII to one of my son's classes. And I was lucky enough to look around and look through the old Tudor parts of the hall. And you can actually see similarities between it and Hampton Court, because that was the first things I thought when I was looking at one of the front. I said, that looks like Hampton Court, albeit smaller. And in it, you can see the building sort of similarities and architectural, the architectural styles.
But just the grandeur as well in terms of, what he was trying to achieve. I mean, I didn't know that about the expense. All I know is that Cardinal Wolsey basically transformed it.
Yes.
It was kind of a country house or a mansion, however you want to put it, but he transformed it into what you could only describe as a palace.
Yeah.
And then, so that created Hampton Court Palace as we know it. Then it's interesting you say about how much Henry spent on it. I mean, I know about kind of the development of the Great Hall and the kitchens and various other areas, but I just think Cardinal Wolsey, he kind of created the palace, and then maybe what Henry was doing was creating the magnificence and the splendor and kind of adding to it. But yeah, it's just an absolutely stunning place. It really is.
It is. I mean, to be fair, Bewley, the bits I got to see of Bewley, the old Tudor parts of Bewley, that going behind the scenes there. I'm a nerd. I love going behind the scenes in these places, not the normal tour that everyone gets. The bits that have got the rubbish piled up because they will hide it from sight. Those bits are the bits I like to see because then you get the more real side of it. But Henry blinged up the palace. Henry went Essex on the palace and blinged it up. And also it was where obviously he brought all his subsequent queens.
Yes.
And one of the reasons he spent so much money on it, and I thought this was an interesting fact, is whenever he got a new queen, he would have the decoration to the old queen would be removed, and to the new queen would. And these were like carvings and stuff, which were in the, I think they're estimating each one was like 500,000 or something. These carvings.
Isn't that interesting? It's kind of a historical version of when if we're breaking up with partners and or a partner leaves us and we remove the photographs.
Yes, or getting
that's a modern version. exactly.
Or
But
get
he
the
would
tattoo removed and have a new one done.
exactly. There you go.
Yes.
How can I change this name?
Yes. And
But
that's what
he would
did.
change the decoration. That's amazing.
Yeah, but when we're talking decoration, we're talking carvings and big grand friezes painted. Just talking new coat of wallpaper.
Wow.
So yes, and obviously he went through the wives.
Yes.
That's
an understatement, isn't it?
I am a bit flippant about this. I can't help it. I can't think of it. Everyone knows the divorce beheaded died, divorce beheaded survived. We all know that. I sometimes Catherine's the wrong way round, but now, so most people associate Hampton Court with Henry, although it wasn't just Henry who lived there. Obviously, you had William of Orange and Queen Mary lived there.
Yep. Yes.
And they did an awful lot of work to the palace as well. You had the Georgian period, although I think it was George III, had so many bad memories of the place. He said, "I'm never living there again," and he sort of wouldn't live there when he became king. But everyone associates it with Tudor, with Henry VIII.
Yeah.
When you did your investigation there, was it Andrew Wise? Was it Andrew Wiseman?
Richard Wiseman.
Wiseman, sorry. That you did this, and I've read some of the notes on it, and I must admit, I mean, I'm not stupid, but even I had to reread a few bits to try and understand what he was trying to say. But one of the things I got from it, that there was a big question of autosuggestion and how many people knew.
Yes.
Some of the, I'm doing this in sort of speech bubble marks because nobody can see me, ghost stories that were associated with it.
Yeah. And that was kind of the lead for us as an investigative team. So to give you a little bit of a context, this was over 20 years ago. The paper was published, I think, 2003, the paper we published on it, but it was over 20 years ago. I was a PhD student, at some point close to finish my PhD. And Richard Wiseman, who was one of my supervisors, my other one was director of the counselling department at the university, but Richard had negotiated with Hampton Court Palace to do a study as part of kind of a little bit of raising awareness and encouraging visitors. So it was kind of a little bit of a tourist perspective on the part of historic royal palaces who kind of own Hampton Court, are responsible for curating for it, and then Richard negotiating kind of the parapsychology side of things. And it was a mixed team. So we had myself, Richard, Caroline Watt was involved from Edinburgh, Paul Stevens at the time, who was a physicist up there, and Emma Greening as well, who's based at Hertfordshire. So that was the team. We went into it very much, and it was Richard kind of spearheading it, going into it thinking how much suggestion would be responsible for people's experiences. That's how we went into it. And effectively what we did was we had participants walk around two areas of Hampton Court Palace. One was the Haunted Gallery, that is forever associated with Catherine Howard and the ghost of Catherine Howard. The other area is Wolsey's Closet, which is still a haunted area of Hampton Court, but less well known. I think there's an association of a dog spirit there, as well as kind of a sense of presence, but certainly a lot less well known. And we had people come to a little talk by Richard, and then he would say, and now I'm going to send you off to a particular area. You're going to have a grid, a floor plan with you on a clipboard, and we just want you to walk around that area and to indicate if you sense anything, feel anything, if there's anything there. And didn't want to give too much suggestion about what they might experience or see, but just sending them off just so they could mark on a floor plan anything, and then maybe write a few details if they could. What they were unaware of was that for some of the participants, some of the people who were turning up to the palace, we would send them into Haunted Gallery, and the line was something like, Haunted Gallery, well known for being haunted in Hampton Court Palace. For the other participants, we would say, we're going to send you into Wolsey's Closet. The literature says, and the marketing literature will tell you about Haunted Gallery. Actually, the real haunted place is Wolsey's Closet. And that would be the only variation in the introduction at all, the suggestion of where the hauntings were, effectively. That's what we were doing. And what we expected to happen was that because of the suggestion that people who were given the suggestion when they went into Wolsey's closet would experience more ghostly experiences, just kind of report things just because we had given that suggestion.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen. That's the thing. The reading of it, when you read the paper, it's written in a particular way. It feels like maybe the focus is a few other things, and it does talk about the environment. But actually, the key thing is that we have a particular line that I've now committed to memory because it encapsulates it all, is, when people report their unusual experiences in particular areas, the effect was not related to their prior knowledge about the reputation of these areas. So even us throwing in suggestion, but also controlling for the fact that they might have heard about it, it didn't have an effect. It didn't give them any more experiences. So as powerful as suggestion is, that was not the key. If anything, Haunted Gallery, again, came out on top as being the most haunted area of Hampton Court Palace compared to Wolsey's closet. Part of that, and I'm not saying it's the full solution, but part of that might be down to an environmental aspect.
Yeah.
So Paul Stevens was looking at kind of the electromagnetic fields, but also local magnetic fields as well. We had a company involved that had a magnetometer. So we talk about K2 meters and EMF meters. The magnetometer they had would be worth about 80,000-90,000 pounds. It's just very high spec stuff, and they were picking up on a particular magnetic component of the stone that was used in the Haunted Gallery that may have had an influence. If you stand next to a strong magnet, you can kind of get a sense of what might be happening, and that potentially may have played an effect. We're very, very careful about saying that it wouldn't necessarily explain everything, but that's the key finding that we got. And I think the most fascinating finding is, suggestion actually didn't play as much of a feature as we thought it might.
That is interesting. I mean, the Haunted Gallery, I think everyone knows, even if you don't know it's called the Haunted Gallery, everyone knows the story of Catherine Howard. What was she? Yep. There's some say she was 18, some say she was 19. But
19, yeah. Yes,
nobody knows. I don't think they know exactly when she was born, but they say it was around then that she would have been. From the research I was doing into it, I always thought she was 19, but I found a couple of historians saying, no, we think she was younger than that. But she supposedly found out that Henry had found out that she was sort of playing around a bit on him, and that he was going to get rid of her. And she's meant to have run screaming through it, sort of trying to get to him to beg for his forgiveness. I can see she probably would have done that if she was young and she was in a situation, she was way over her head in a situation. But then again, if a king asks you to marry him, you're probably not going to say no, because if you say no, you're probably going to end up losing your head regardless.
Yes.
And when you're young, you have that kind of naive sort of sense of immortality, don't you? As in, it won't happen to me. Whether she did run through there or not, I don't know. But what I find really interesting is there's so many other cases of death, if you like, associated with the place. Why is it that the more dramatic ones, like Catherine Howard, that people focus on? I mean, you've got his son Edward was born there. Jane Seymour died there. William Orange died there. I mean, that's just a few of them. And I actually found a couple. I like to look in newspapers to see any interesting. And I found two. One was from 1844, and they found a dismembered baby's body in the sewer system. Mm-hmm. And they only estimate this baby would have died. The doctor thought it was about a week or so before it had been put in the sewers. And gradually, as they flushed the sewers, more parts of this poor little newborn came out. Or by that point, they were being rented. The apartments were being used as grace and favour apartments. So it could have been anyone. And then 1871, they're doing some building work in one of the old courtyard areas, and they discovered
skeletons.
Yeah, they date back to around 1670 or so. You don't hear that much about those sort of things, which to me, if you look on simplistic terms, could cause a haunting. Why is it with hauntings we only focus on famous people?
But it's interesting you say that, but when you start to look at some of the haunting experiences, and the fascinating thing about Hampton Court Palace, and this is why it will always be in my top 10, I would even say top 5 haunted locations, is because actually the one of the curators there, one of the guys that does the tours, he's got written accounts of people having haunting experiences going back 200 years and 200 years and more, of people reporting their experiences, writing it down in various things, and he's collated all of that. I've got a version of it somewhere which I must dig out and send to you, because it does make for fascinating reading. And for me, there are accounts of Jane Seymour. So you said about her being the third wife and dying because of childbirth, and there are accounts of her being seen there. There are accounts of others that have seen there. So I think there was a nurse at some point that died, and she
was a wet nurse, right, who's nursed the Queen Elizabeth when she was still through smallpox and caught it herself.
So you do have other instances, but you're absolutely right. Nothing has grabbed the attention more than the Catherine Howard story. And I think maybe part of it is because before I went there, I associated Hampton Court Palace, for me in my head, with Catherine Howard. I didn't even really think about Henry VIII. Having now been there over 20 years ago, and then I ended up through kind of however it happens and quirks of circumstance, I ended up living about 5 miles away from Hampton Court Palace.
Oh, wow.
about 10 years after I had taken part in that investigation and study. So I ended up visiting it 10, 15 times a year for a long period. So really got to know it really well. But the first time I visited, you walk into that haunted gallery. They should remove the name, because the haunted gallery immediately provokes lots of imagination. But actually you walk into it and it's a long gallery, and off the gallery is the little prayer room where Henry VIII would have sat and knelt, looking out over the chapel from where he is. And the story, it really conjures up an image, and an emotive image that you don't have necessarily with the other ghosts. The fact that you've got this 18, 19-year-old begging for mercy, running down this gallery, and you can almost imagine it as you're there, running down this gallery, trying to reach him. He undoubtedly, if it happened that way, would have heard her screams. As he was in the prayer room, he would have heard her screams, and then the guards kind of dragging her back along the haunted gallery. It's a perfect Hollywood image. Really is a perfect Hollywood image. And I think it's because of that it's really stuck in the imagination of people that have visited Hampton Court Palace, but also people that have stayed in Hampton Court Palace over the years since that original beheading. In 1542. It's since then you've got that whole story associated with it, which I can understand why it's captured the imagination of people. He's talking about a location where in any other location in the country, if you had 2 skeletons discovered,
yes,
that would be the haunting story. Yes. That would be the case that you would latch on to. Yeah. And all the other figures. But actually, you've got a location that has so much history and so many figures associated with it. Actually, there's a competition for which one would be the most engaging and which one would be the most talked about. For me, I can completely understand why Catherine has won out, even over the fact that there were 2 skeletons, or even over the fact that there was a ghost captured on CCTV coming out the fire doors.
The skeleton opening the doors or something. Yes. Yeah, I just it's just a question I've always asked, why people, if they look at somewhere, it's like Anne Boleyn is seen in so many different places.
Oh, yes.
And people have said, well, how can they haunt? Well, it's different types of hauntings. You've got residual, you've got interactive. Most of the hauntings of Anne Boleyn do seem to be residual. And that, that's just a blip in time, it's almost. But I look at some of the people that must have lived at Hampton Court, and I do, and I'm being a bit sort of flippant here, but I do wonder if there's like some former lady in waiting and stuff who's standing there with her arms crossed going, it's not blooming Catherine shouting at you, it's me. How rude,
yes.
Assuming I'm that woman sort of thing. And I just think that maybe I don't know if the palaces would ever allow proper, real in-depth digging into to find out what is going on, because that was amazing.
Oh, yes. No, it absolutely would be amazing. But I think what you're tapping into there, and as a historian, you will be so familiar with this idea that there will be particular stories that people will latch on to, especially if there's a key name associated with them. It's the same argument and discussion that I have with colleagues of mine and psychic friends of mine who do past life regression. That it's rare. It happens, but it's rare you hear about those past life regression cases where they regress back into being a cleaner in a kitchen in 200-300 years ago, in a little back kitchen in some pokey little cafe or bakers or wherever. It's often when people past life regress, it's key names, and those are the key names, historical names, and people latch onto those. And it's the same reason with Catherine Howard. Yeah, absolutely. When people have heard the screams or seen the apparition or felt the cold presence of something, which is another part of that gallery, or felt just a general sense of presence or a sense of foreboding or negativity in that particular area, absolutely. Who's to say that it isn't one of the hundreds, if not thousands, of people that would have graced that hall in its history? There could easily have been. But what's more interesting when you're telling it to friends and telling it to others and saying, oh, yeah, I felt a sense of presence, don't know what it could be, versus, oh, I felt a sense of presence when I was in the haunted gallery, and that was where Catherine Howard was dragged screaming for mercy before she was taken off to the tower and beheaded. Which story is more engaging?
To be honest, I'm likely to tell the other one, because that's me.
And absolutely, the most interesting thing, and maybe this is the start of it, maybe this is what we could do together, is do some digging to find out, because I'd love to know about the authenticity of that actual experience.
Whether she did run through there.
When she found out that she was going to be beheaded, are you honestly telling me, because Hampton Court Palace, are you honestly telling me she would have got past everybody to get to the haunted gallery, to be that close distance away from Henry VIII before she was dragged along? It seems, I find it pretty unbelievable that she wouldn't have been stopped by some security earlier on, some nights earlier on, but who's to know? It's just fascinating. And the fascinating part for me is I will always look back at that investigation and that study that I did with particular fondness, because as detailed as that study was, and as hard work it was, because there was a lot of work, a lot of traipsing around, a lot of investigating we did in terms of setting up all the environmental monitoring stuff, collating data analysis. But what people don't know is I lived in Hampton Court Palace for 2 weeks.
You kept that one quiet.
Oh, yes, that's not part of the article. As you walk into Hampton Court Palace, the driveway that leads up to the main gate, on the left-hand side where the entrance shop is, there's a series of cottages, basically. I lived in one of those, and it was an unfurnished cottage. But hey, I'm not complaining, because I had a camp bed and I lived there for 2 weeks. And do you know what? It meant for that 2-week period, I could go wherever I wanted to.
The run of Hampton Court Palace.
The run of Hampton, and pretty much, I mean, I couldn't do it every single night because it was exhausting, because they were very long days. But I would say at least 4 or 5 nights out of each week, I was off with a security guard walking around the grounds of Hampton Court Palace with them, hearing their stories, and I've got recordings of their stories when I interviewed them, but seeing parts of the palace that just phenomenal. Exactly like you say, the parts of the palace that are not necessary, that wouldn't be open to the public.
Yeah.
The less polished parts, but the more real parts as well. So yeah, fantastic experience.
I can't believe you told me that when we've got 2 minutes left to talk. That's really not fair, Kieran.
I do apologise.
I was going to say you'd have been fine on a camp bed. You were a student at that point, you know.
Oh, yes, that was nothing. It was luxury for me. I mean, think about it. I was waking up in the morning, getting out of the camp bed, looking out, and my window view was Hampton Court Palace and the River Thames next to it. Yeah, bliss, absolute bliss.
So, the $1 million question. Do you think there's something going on there that we can't explain?
Oh, that's a good question. And I will...
I didn't say, is it haunted? I said, is there something going on there that we can't explain?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And it's the reason why it's in my top 10 is because those experiences that people are reporting over the last 200 years plus that we've got written records of, that even though ghost stories and people's ghostly experiences have existed as long as we have had storytelling, as long as human beings have existed, that's given. You've got a location there where it's not people's experiences are because of a TV show or because of an initial experience, and then a ghost group goes in and then it builds up its reputation because of that. You've got a location that was haunted hundreds of years ago, and you've got a reputable areas of that building where people are still reporting odd sensations and odd kind of spooky sensations, and they all marry up, they all tie up. When you start to analyze these accounts and put them onto a grid plan, you go, wow, 250 years ago, that was the area where that person was reporting that experience, put across there. And now fast forward 200 years, send a group of people through that same location. They're having the same experience. And actually, the environmental stuff can only go part way to explain what's going on there. There's still kind of an unclear part about, what is going on in Hampton Court Palace.
Well, give us a shout if they let you go back again.
I will do. I'll sell tickets.
I will dress up as Catherine Howard and I will run screaming through the corridor and see if through the gallery and see if it actually triggers anything.
Brilliant. It's a deal.
Yeah.
You've said it now publicly. It's a deal.
I don't say anything I don't mean, Kieran. I'd be up for it. I don't mind. If Lucy Woolsey can get dressed up and do all this stuff, so can I. Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you. I know you're very, very busy, and I appreciate you, even though I've been after you for nearly 3 years to do this show with me.
That's true. Got there in the end. Only took 3 years.
Only took 3 years. I think it was me cornering you at that book launch and saying, why haven't you done
yes, that's right.
Yes, when I was on crack.
Here we are.
A little bit drunk. Well, thank you ever so much. Thank you. I shall let you go. You've been an absolute star. Thank you so much. Do keep in touch and do let me have a look at those accounts if you find.
Yes, please do. Please do remind me. Yes. They're on an old computer, but I've got all of those accounts of Hampton Court Palace all written up, specifically because I didn't want them lost.
Yes.
And if one person had them, I got a sense that they may be lost, but actually I've got copies of them, so I will definitely send them on to you.
Yes, thank you. Well, that has been the wonderful Dr. Ciaran O'Keeffe. Rounding off our 2020 of Haunted Histories here on Paranormal UK Radio. I hope you enjoyed that. I will be back in January with a whole year's worth of shows coming up for you in 2021, obviously on Paranormal UK Radio and Haunted Histories. But if you want to contact me about anything, you know how to do it. Facebook, email, whichever way, Twitter, I'm on all of them. You can find me anywhere. But on that note, thank you ever so much for listening. Have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.